A wise man once told a blind man, "Do not look at the sun, for it will blind the sighted, and for you it will only offer warmth." But the blind man replied, "I desire not warmth, but the right to say I have seen the light." Konstantin Sidorov had never seen the light. His world was a paper crypt, where the only sun was a lamp casting a jaundiced glow on stacks of reports. For 40 years, he was not a man, but a function, a flawless mechanism, transferring columns of figures from one ledger to another. His movements were as precise as a pendulum's swing, and his signature was indistinguishable from yesterday's. He desired neither the gold nor the power that circulated in the offices above. He craved something else, substance, for his name, penned in ink on the last page, to mean more than just a period at the end of a long alien sentence, for his shadow to finally detach from the wall and gain its own substance. This was a quiet, profound yearning, a yearning to be an author, not merely a line. This yearning found its wellspring on the dullest of days. It was the day when his months of labor, analytical report on raw material flow dynamics over the third decade, landed on the desk of his department head, Voronov, and was appropriated with a slight nod. Sidorov's name, which he had meticulously written on the title page, was crossed out with a thick line, and above it, in a crooked, authoritative hand, Voronov was inscribed. Konstantin uttered not a word. He merely watched as his shadow seemed to thin even further, pressing tighter against the wall as if ashamed of its owner. All his substance, all his significance, was negated by a single stroke of a pen. That evening, while going through archival files that no one had opened in 20 years, his fingers brushed against a strange, unnumbered folder. Inside lay a single sheet. It was neither parchment nor paper. The material was as thin as an eyelid and warm to the touch, with a faint network of milky veins. It was blank. But its emptiness was different. Not passive, but listening, absorbing the dim lamplight. Sidorov, not knowing why, took it home. That night, he sat at his desk. The sheet lay before him, and Konstantin felt as if it breathed. He took his pen, dipped it in ink, and yielding to a sudden, irrational impulse, wrote on a scrap of ordinary paper, "The milk has gone sour." Then he placed this scrap onto the strange sheet. The ink on the scrap shimmered, flowed as if from heat, and absorbed into the smooth surface beneath it. The scrap became blank, and on the milky sheet, the same phrase appeared. "The milk has gone sour." A cold sweat broke over Sidorov. He went to the refrigerator and opened the carton of milk he'd bought that morning. The smell was unbearably sour. He understood. The sheet didn't copy. It affirmed. It was not a reflection, but a seal, binding reality. The next night, the ritual was repeated. Only this time, on an ordinary sheet of paper, Konstantin wrote what should have been true. He wrote 2 words, Konstantin Sidorov. He placed this sheet on the title page of his stolen report. Then he covered it all with the living, absorbing sheet. He watched, holding his breath, as his name, written by his own hand, sank into the paper, displacing the alien, ugly Voronov. The process took no more than a minute. When he removed the milky sheet, his name now graced the report, beneath the crossed-out line. He wasn't creating a lie. He was merely correcting an error in the great book of existence. That morning, when Voronov patted his shoulder as he passed, saying, "Excellent report, Sidorov. I'm proud to have people like you working for me," Konstantin for the first time felt not the parquet floor of a government institution beneath his feet, but solid ground. He felt substance. And this was only the beginning. He realized that in his hands was not just a curious artifact. In his hands was the right to rewrite lines in others' sentences, and eventually, the sentences themselves. A week passed in a dense, viscous sensation of his own substance. Colleagues who used to look right through him now nodded in greeting. The secretary brought him coffee without being asked. Sidorov's steps down the corridor were no longer a rustle of paper. They sounded dull and weighty, like a bookbinder's thumps on the spine of a finished book. But this was a false fullness. Every time Voronov entered the office, the air would thin again. The boss was a living reminder of that crossed-out line, of the humiliation that couldn't simply be corrected. It could only be uprooted. Voronov was not a man, but an ink blot on the pristine page of Sidorov's existence. And Konstantin, having known the power of an editor, could no longer tolerate a typographical error. He did not want revenge. Revenge is a hot, human emotion. He, however, felt a cold, clear need for textual purity. That night he returned to the archive. The smell of dust and decay no longer oppressed him. Now it was the scent of parchment awaiting revision. He knew what he was looking for. Personnel file number 217, Voronov Pavel Ignatievich. He opened the thin cardboard folder. Biography, performance reviews, appointment orders. A man's entire life reduced to a few typewritten pages. Dry, soulless text, yet possessing monstrous power. The power to define who Pavel Voronov was. Sidorov looked at the photograph. A full, self-satisfied face. The gaze of a man who never doubted his right to sign off on others' words. He felt no hatred. He felt the same as a gardener feels towards a weed strangling a sprout. He took out the milky sheet. In the pallid lamplight, it resembled the skin of a newborn. On a scrap of official paper, Konstantin wrote neither a command nor a curse. He formulated the ultimate, flawless correction. Just 5 words written in his now firm, confident hand. Pavel Voronov's memory. A blank slate. He placed the note on the first page of the personnel file, directly over the photograph. He covered it with the living artifact. The process began. Sidorov thought he heard a quiet sigh, as if air was escaping a punctured bubble. The ink on his note didn't just absorb. It was drunk in greedily, and for a moment the milky sheet turned pink, infused with an alien essence, before becoming pristinely white again. He removed it. The note was blank. The photograph in the file had not changed. But Sidorov knew. The correction had been made. The great book had closed one of its pages forever. The next morning, Voronov arrived at work on time. He sat at his desk, looked at the stack of papers, and picked up none. His face was calm, almost serene. When the secretary addressed him, he smiled politely, as one smiles at a stranger on the street. He looked at people, and in his eyes was only a smooth, reflective surface. He recognized them the way one recognizes a chair or a table, as objects devoid of history. An hour later, his wife rushed in. She was crying, grabbing his hands, shouting something about their children, their home, last night. Voronov looked at her with polite bewilderment, slightly startled by her turbulent emotions. He didn't remember her. He didn't remember anything. He was a man without a past, a vessel from which all contents had been poured, leaving only the form. Doctors threw up their hands, speaking of a rare form of stress-induced amnesia. Sidorov stood in the office doorway and observed the scene. He saw the woman's tears, saw the empty, like 2 freshly washed windows, eyes of his former boss, and he felt not a drop of remorse. He felt only the deep, icy satisfaction of a perfectionist who had purged a hideous typo. This is what a corrected error looks like. This is what purity looks like. Voronov's chair received his body as earth receives a seed. On his first day in the new position, Konstantin Sidorov felt as if his substance had multiplied tenfold. Every document placed on his desk was not merely paper, but a prayer addressed to him. His signature, no longer a timid line at the bottom, but a crowning resolution, was an act of creation. Approve. Reject. To be implemented. These words, sealed with his name, flowed through the veins of the institution, making its heart beat to the desired rhythm. He was not just a department head. He became the grammatical law of this small world. He corrected not only reports, but also destinies. Minor personnel changes, bonuses, reprimands. All of it was the placement of punctuation marks in a long, tedious text that he now had the right to edit at his discretion. He felt not power, but order. An order in which his name was the main, foundational word. The purity he achieved was impeccable. But purity has a property. It strives for the absolute. Soon, Sidorov noticed something strange. The world he so diligently edited began to fade. People whose fates he decided with a single stroke of a pen lost their colors. The young specialist he promoted, saving him from an unfair reprimand, turned into a flawless yet faceless mechanism. His jokes became flat, his biography, a collection of standard facts. He became a function, convenient and predictable. Everything Sidorov's editorial hand touched became simpler, smoother, losing the rough edges and cracks where life truly resided. He tried to make more complex revisions. On scraps of paper he wrote, "Petrov will develop a brilliant sense of humor. Anna from accounting will recall her childhood dream of becoming an artist." He placed them on personnel files, covered them with the milky sheet. But nothing happened. The artifact in his hands was not a pen, but an eraser. It couldn't write. It could only erase. And every touch it made to the world erased another detail, another color, another random, imperfect, living trait. The process was relentless, like water seeping into a basement. First, conversations in the smoking room disappeared. Then, arguments in planning meetings. The corridors of the institution filled with silence, disturbed only by the rustle of papers. Colleagues moved along precise trajectories, their faces smooth masks of polite indifference. They were not people, but paragraphs in a perfect yet dead text. Sidorov watched them from his office and for the first time felt not satisfaction, but a chill emanating from the very heart of creation. He was an author who had become so engrossed in proofreading that he hadn't noticed he'd erased all the characters from his book. He tried to stop, hid the milky sheet in his safe, but it was too late. The revisions had already been incorporated into the main edition. The mechanism had been set in motion, and the world continued to simplify by inertia, striving towards the ideal emptiness the editor had prescribed. One morning he came into his office and realized that the silence had become absolute. Outside the window there was no city. Only a gray, flat, endless shroud, no sound, no movement. He was alone. In a vast building, in an empty world. He walked to his desk. On it lay only two items, his pen and the milky, warm-to-the-touch sheet. He had craved substance, and became the only object in the universe to possess mass. He had yearned to be an author, and was left alone with his main and final work, emptiness. He took his pen, dipped it into an inkwell that no longer existed, and on a phantom scrap of paper, he wrote the only phrase he was still capable of. Konstantin Sidorov. He placed it on the living sheet. The ink absorbed. The phrase appeared on the milky skin. He looked at it. His name, written by his hand. It now meant absolutely everything and absolutely nothing. He was the period at the end of a sentence that had been erased, and he was condemned to eternally contemplate this period, feeling its boundless, crushing weight. Sometime later, a student again asked the wise man, "Teacher, what became of that blind man who desired not warmth, but the right to say he had seen the light?" The wise man was silent for a long time, gazing into the dying embers of the fire as if reading the answer within them. Finally he spoke. "The universe is a precise echo. It returns to the one who asks not what they need, but the exact measure of their desire." He received his right. When he wished to become the sole author, the world around him turned into a blank page. The sun became an ink stain, and all other words turned to dust. He alone remained sighted in an endless dead void, where the only text was himself. And now he sits in this eternal night, reading his name, inscribed on the skin of existence, again and again. And in this lies his endless reward, and his endless sentence,